Before the name Stalin echoed through the halls of power, there was a boy, Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili. He was born in Gori, Georgia, in 1878. A small town, a world away from the grand destiny that awaited him. His childhood was not an easy one. Poverty was a constant companion. His father, a shoemaker, was often harsh. These early experiences of hardship and struggle, they leave a mark. They shaped the man, the leader, the force he would become. His mother, Kiki, had different dreams for him. She saw a future for Joseph in the church. She worked tirelessly to send him to a theological seminary in Tiflis. Here, he was a bright student, yet also a rebellious one. He read forbidden books, books that spoke of revolution, of changing the world. Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin. These names, these ideas began to ignite a fire within him. The path of a priest was not his to walk. A different calling, far more tumultuous, was beckoning. The young Iosif, now calling himself Koba, a name borrowed from a Georgian folk hero, stepped into the clandestine world of revolutionary politics. He joined the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. He organized strikes, he wrote pamphlets, he was arrested multiple times, exiled to the frozen wastes of Siberia. The early 20th century was a time of immense upheaval in Russia. The old order of the Tsars was crumbling. Amidst this chaos, Koba found his place within the Bolshevik faction, led by the charismatic Vladimir Lenin. He wasn't initially a frontline leader, not like Trotsky, whose fiery speeches captivated crowds. Koba was different. He was an organizer, a man who worked behind the scenes. He was diligent, meticulous, and utterly devoted to the party. Lenin recognized his talents, his unwavering loyalty, his capacity for getting things done, no matter the cost. When the February Revolution of 1917 overthrew the Tsar, Koba was there. He returned from exile to Petrograd, the heart of the storm. Then came the October Revolution, when the Bolsheviks seized power. Koba played his part, though perhaps not the heroic central role later Soviet propaganda would claim. He was appointed People's Commissar for Nationalities. A seemingly modest post, but it gave him influence over vast, diverse territories of the former Russian Empire. He was learning the levers of power, understanding the mechanics of a state in flux. After the revolution and the brutal civil war that followed, Lenin's health began to fail. A power vacuum started to emerge. This was Koba's moment. In 1922, he was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party. On the surface, it seemed like a bureaucratic role, a job for an administrator. But Koba, now increasingly known as Stalin, meaning man of steel, saw its potential. He controlled party appointments, who got what job, who was promoted, who was sidelined. Once firmly in control, Stalin embarked on a monumental and brutal transformation of the Soviet Union. He believed the nation was dangerously behind the industrialized West. To survive, to become a true socialist power, it needed to modernize and fast. Thus began the era of the 5-year plans in 1928. Ambitious targets were set for coal, for steel, for electricity. New cities, new factories rose from the ground, often built by forced labor, under appalling conditions. The human cost was immense, but for Stalin, the goal justified any means. Parallel to this industrial drive was the policy of collectivization in agriculture. Millions of individual peasant farms were to be forcibly consolidated into large state-controlled collective farms, or kolkhozes. Stalin believed this would increase efficiency, ensure grain supply for the cities and for export, and break the power of the kulaks, the wealthier peasants he saw as class enemies. This policy was met with fierce resistance. Peasants slaughtered their livestock rather than hand them over. They burned crops. The state responded with overwhelming force. The consequences of forced collectivization were catastrophic, particularly in Ukraine, the Kuban, and other grain-producing regions. The Holodomor, the terror famine of 1932-33, saw millions perish from starvation. Was it a deliberate act of genocide or the horrific, unintended consequence of a ruthless policy? Historians continue to debate. What is undeniable is the scale of human suffering. Section 4. The Reign of Terror, the Great Purges. As Stalin consolidated his power, his suspicion, perhaps his paranoia, grew. He saw enemies everywhere. Within the party, in the military, among intellectuals, even among ordinary citizens. To eliminate any potential opposition, real or imagined, he unleashed the Great Purge, or the Great Terror, in the mid to late 1930s. This was a period of unimaginable fear and repression. The secret police, the NKVD, became an all-powerful instrument of Stalin's will, arresting, torturing, and executing vast numbers of people. The purges targeted old Bolsheviks, many of whom had been Lenin's comrades. Men who had fought alongside Stalin in the revolution now found themselves accused of treason, espionage, and plotting to overthrow the state. Elaborate show trials were staged in Moscow. Prominent figures confessed to fantastic crimes, often after enduring horrific torture or threats against their families. These trials were broadcast to the world, a grim spectacle designed to demonstrate the ever-present threat of internal enemies and the necessity of Stalin's vigilance. But the terror reached far beyond the party elite. Millions of ordinary Soviet citizens were caught in its web. A careless word, a perceived slight, a denunciation by a jealous neighbor. Any of these could lead to arrest, imprisonment in the Gulag labor camps, or execution. Section 5. The Great Patriotic War, a Nation's Struggle. As the 1930s drew to a close, the storm clouds of war gathered over Europe. Stalin, ever the pragmatist, sought to buy time for the Soviet Union to further build its strength. In August 1939, the world was stunned by the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Secret protocols divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. This pact allowed Hitler to invade Poland without fear of a two-front war, and it gave Stalin territory and, he hoped, breathing space. But this breathing space was tragically short-lived. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. Stalin was reportedly shocked, perhaps even paralyzed by the news, despite numerous intelligence warnings. The initial German advance was devastating. Soviet forces were unprepared, poorly led in many areas due to the purges, and suffered enormous losses in men and material. The German army pushed deep into Soviet territory, reaching the outskirts of Moscow and Leningrad, yet the Soviet people and the Red Army did not break. What followed was a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality, known in the Soviet Union as the Great Patriotic War. Stalin, recovering from his initial shock, rallied the nation with appeals to Russian patriotism as much as to communist ideology. Section 6. The Iron Curtain Descends, Post-War World, and Cold War. Victory in the Great Patriotic War transformed the Soviet Union into a global superpower, second only to the United States. As the Red Army pushed westward, liberating countries from Nazi occupation, it also established Soviet-backed communist regimes across Eastern Europe. Nations like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and East Germany found themselves behind what Winston Churchill would memorably call the Iron Curtain. Stalin saw this buffer zone as essential for Soviet security, a protection against future invasions from the West. For the people living there, it meant decades of Soviet domination. The alliance forged in wartime between the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain quickly fractured. Deep ideological differences, mutual suspicion, and conflicting geopolitical ambitions led to the onset of the Cold War. This was a new kind of conflict, a struggle for global influence waged through proxy wars, arms races, espionage, and propaganda. The world divided into two hostile camps. Stalin, ever wary, oversaw the rapid development of the Soviet atomic bomb, successfully tested in 1949, ending the American nuclear monopoly, and escalating the stakes of this new global confrontation. In his later years, Stalin's paranoia, which had fueled the purges of the 1930s, seemed to intensify. Section 7. The End of an Era, Death and De-Stalinization. The reign of Joseph Stalin, a period of immense transformation, terror, and triumph, came to an end on March 5, 1953. He suffered a stroke a few days earlier at his dacha outside Moscow. The circumstances surrounding his final hours are shrouded in some mystery and delay in medical assistance, perhaps a reflection of the fear even his closest associates felt towards him. For nearly 3 decades, he had been the undisputed absolute ruler of the Soviet Union. His death sent shockwaves across the nation and around the world. The initial reaction within the Soviet Union was a complex mix of genuine grief, uncertainty, and perhaps for many, a hidden sense of relief. Decades of relentless propaganda had built Stalin into a demigod, the father of nations, the wise leader who had guided the country through industrialization and war. His public funeral was a massive emotional event. Yet beneath the surface, the question of what came next and who would succeed him created a period of intense political maneuvering among his lieutenants, men like Malenkov, Beria, and Khrushchev. It was Nikita Khrushchev who eventually emerged as the dominant figure. In 1956, at the 20th Party Congress, Khrushchev delivered what became known as the secret speech. In it, he stunned delegates by denouncing Stalin's cult of personality and detailing many of the crimes and excesses committed during his rule, particularly the Purges. This marked the beginning of De-Stalinization. Statues were torn down, cities named after him were renamed, and thousands of political prisoners were released from the